Welcome to another edition of State of Affairs. We are having conversations that matter, and I am very pleased to have a special guest today with us. He is a West Virginia State Representative, Mr. Mark Zatezalo, District Number 1. He sits on the Committee of Energy and Infrastructure and also the Judiciary Committee, and he is one of our prominent Serbian Americans. Mark, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about your background. We don't have many Serbian Americans who are involved directly in the political process or are elected officials themselves. How did you get involved and how did you become state representative?
It's it's interesting. I was asked by the Republican committee of my county if I ever thought of running, and I thought my response to them was, why would I do that? I had to clean it up a little bit, but why would I do that? And they said, you are a geologist, you understand the shale industry.
Sure.
We think that's going to be important. And of course, as it ends up, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio, if they were their own country, would be the 5th largest natural gas producer in the world. So it is important. And I ran to help with energy issues. And I'm to let you know, I was a geologist who studied environmental issues for well over 35 years. So I feel like I do contribute and I can contribute, and I'm glad to do that.
Excellent. Now tell us a little bit about the Serbian community or Americans of Serbian descent in your area.
Yeah, I live along the Ohio River in the very northern part of West Virginia, in a town called Weirton. And Weirton is right across the river from Steubenville. And of course, there is a church in Steubenville that was consecrated in 1947. My father was the president at that time, and it was consecrated by Bishop Nikolai.
Sure.
You know, so we are one of the few people that actually have some film of him consecrating the church. So it's kind of interesting. My family, my father's family came here in 1896 and worked in the steel mills along the Ohio River. My other grandfather came here in 1914 from Bosnia, my mother's family. So we have a over 100-year history in the Ohio Valley. And
wonderful.
I've been involved with the Serbian church ever since, since the beginning. So it's kind of interesting.
Sure, and it's good to know for us. As I said, not many Serbian Americans are involved in the political process, but now that we are getting re-galvanized and re-engaged, it's important for our community to hear from people like you. Now, your expertise, especially in the energy industry, that has been such a topic of tension between the conservatives and the liberals and Republicans and Democrats. What say you to some of these issues that are coming up, especially through the new Green Deal or whatever it is that they're calling it? Is it and what is it that you're doing, especially sitting in that basin, that is so important? How safe is all of this for the environment, and can we safely do it but still maintain our energy independence?
That is a great but very deep question with a lot of sidebars and that type of thing. Let me just say this. I understand the new Green Deal people and what they want, but what they want and what the world is doing are two entirely different things.
Okay.
You would think that the United States is the worst polluter and the worst as far as carbon dioxide emissions. We're not even close. China is far worse. They have well over 1,100 to 1,200 gigawatts of coal-fired power. We have 330. And they're adding to it. Meanwhile, India is trying to surpass them. Energy is necessary for economic development and the well-being of the people. There is no question about it. There is no, I understand what they are doing. What I can't understand is, why is it okay if carbon dioxide is the real issue?
Sure.
And so here we sit with 15% of the emissions of the world and getting smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And that's somehow the worst part of the whole thing. It doesn't make sense to me. But then what really doesn't make sense to me is the history of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We are not even close to the worst that it's ever been, or the highest level. Let me put it that way. Worst is not the right term. The estimates for the maximum carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is around 7,800 parts per million.
Okay.
We're at 400. Now that is elevated from 280, which is what it was in the 1800s, but it's nowhere near the maximum. And when you do scientific analysis, you try to say, well, what is the worst case and what is the best case, and what was the lowest level and what's the highest level? And we're so close to the lowest level, I would worry more about plants growing, because at 150 parts per million CO2, plants cease to grow, which I think would be a calamity.
Sure, absolutely.
So do we have time to figure this out and see what we can do and see what makes sense? I'd say yes. That doesn't mean we shouldn't think about alternate forms of energy, because I don't have any problem with that.
Absolutely.
There are moves on to have small nuclear power plants. I think that's a couple years away. I think until we can come up with a plan that actually is resilient, keeps the grid consistent and steady, I think a faulty electric grid is a national security issue and should be seen as such.
Absolutely.
They don't seem to care about that on the other side, but I think it's important, especially when it doesn't really make any. We're not going to fundamentally change the CO2 levels based on what we do. It will not happen, because
understood.
One example. A fellow just left this valley, a power plant just down the river from us, to move to India, where they are starting up a new plant. The new plant is similar to that one, and that's why he's moving, but it's 10 times bigger. And the 25% of the energy that they generate in the valley that's used for environmental controls are not on the new plant that's 10 times larger. You see what I sit there, and it's a little bit hypocritical. So those are things that are in the back of my mind when I weigh these issues.
Understood.
Yeah.
Now, I would like to rewind a little bit to last year. We have all, I think, understood how important our local state legislature is when it comes to the elections and when it comes to election integrity. Tell us a little bit about West Virginia, what took place last year, and what do you see in terms of 2020? And then we're looking towards 2022. Are we safe, even thinking about the new election coming up, did we clean up what happened last year?
West Virginia, the election was reported probably around 8:30 or 9 o'clock, election night, and it was done. And that was the end. We have a Secretary of State, is an Afghanistan veteran, Mac Warner, who really worked hard. We also, in the years that I was in the legislature, worked hard on having photo ID for elections. And basically that took care of a lot of things. In the meantime, he went to every high school and made sure and gave contests for the high school that would register the most students to vote. Excellent. What a great idea. We want people to vote. Voting is really fundamental to our level form of government. And everybody, both sides of the aisle encourages everybody to vote. We want honest and fair votes. There were many, many, many examples back in the past of counties in West Virginia that had thousands of people more than the registered voters who actually voted. And we brought that forth when the photo ID issue came up about 5 or 6 years ago, and we passed the legislation, and we haven't heard any negatives about it. Frankly, I mean, people don't have any problem. I don't have any problem. They ask me for my ID every time I vote.
Sure.
And I'm glad to show it, and it's okay. So a lot of issues that came into play in some other states weren't even existing in West Virginia during this past election. So I think we're lucky, and I think some of the controversy is probably not that strong. It's not that big a deal. So the best way I can explain it.
Absolutely. Now, again, state legislature doesn't get involved too much in foreign policy, but you just mentioned Afghanistan, and we are watching this unfortunate mess that is happening. And given that we are Americans, but of Serbian heritage, we also understand specific aspects of foreign policy that we have somewhat either lived through directly if people came from former Yugoslavia or from Serbia, or those who were born here still understand what their families have gone through. And now we're watching Afghanistan. We are watching elements of the same type of foreign policy that keeps getting us in trouble. As an elected official, just looking at all of this, and of course, having all of these contacts to our veterans, what say you? What do you see is happening with our country?
Well, I mean, what do I really think is happening? The bottom line, I think Trump is in the heads of the opposition, and everything that he does, they try to outdo him, even if it doesn't make any sense. And how many examples do you want? The border, which I think is a disaster, and we have to be more liberal than Trump. Prison reform, which Trump started and actually started the conversation. They decided to just let everybody out of prison, rather than getting people that actually really didn't belong there and actually giving them another chance, which Trump started. Well, they overreacted and went orders of magnitude more than what he would have done, just to show how liberal they are and how, it's not working. The crime rate shows that, I believe, but and the Afghanistan thing is Trump, knowing Trump and what he has done, I don't think he would leave people stranded in Afghanistan.
Absolutely not.
As a matter of fact, I guess his plan was overridden by Biden. What this does for us who have relatives in the old country and that kind of thing is it makes the U.S., you have to have questions about the U.S. and whether we need to be their staunch ally or somebody who has a lot of respect for the U.S., but not to get too heavily involved in some of the things that they do. I don't know any other way to do it. I unless somebody can suggest to me why everything we've done is well thought out, and I really have severe questions about what's being done nowadays.
Absolutely. That is a great point for people to consider. And you brought up something interesting. Henry Kissinger at some point said, being America's enemy makes you an enemy, but being a friend, and I'm paraphrasing, is even more dangerous at times. So it's truly an interesting, interesting paradox. And especially then going back to Serbia's issue with its province of Kosovo. You and I had a conversation over the phone not too long ago, and especially even the speeches that you would give in front of your state legislature. What are your thoughts, and even in terms of Serbian Americans getting involved in the political process and trying to sort of retell the story of the 1990s that they never had a chance to tell? because the opposition has been very liberal in telling their story unopposed and spreading essentially the propaganda. And the Serbs never got a chance to tell their side of the story. And now we're sort of entering the arena, maybe a little too late, but it's never too late. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of opposition immediately, even just few months of our activities. We are hearing from the opposition, and they're already trying to bully us and threaten us. So the Serbs really need to get organized, and we need to get in front of this finally.
Well, yeah, and the history, one of these days, and I have not made the speech yet, but I intend to go through the whole history and just run right down through it to from Kosovo to the point of my grandmother's village being bombed by the US Air Force. So she happens to come from the same area as Ratko Mladic. So, so that's how that happened. But when you put that history up against the woke agenda,
yes,
what do we owe anybody for the hundreds of years of trials and tribulations that we've been through as a people? I need an exemption from all this, is what is the best way I can say.
That is a great way to put it. Yes, we are all exempt.
Exactly. As far as the political situation right now, you must understand, and this is very difficult for me to say, but in America these days, the narrative is more important than any facts.
Yes.
And facts come in and they're processed, and if they fit the narrative, they're put out there, and if they don't, they die. Very dangerous. It's for our form of government, that is extremely, extremely dangerous. And, the climate change thing, the things that I've told you, my comments will never see the light of day. They do a little bit. People mention them in passing, but they don't make a big issue out of it. That may be coming, and I hope it will. But I saw it when, my brother said to me, he's an attorney in Columbus, but he said to me, we're reading all this stuff about what's happening when the war was on in Bosnia. We know what the history is. We understand all this stuff, and none of this stuff makes any sense. What about all the other things that they report that we don't even understand? This is something we understand. He was kind of shocked by the whole thing. And we, of course, in America tried to do some things to help. I mean, we took buses to Washington and demonstrated around the White House, and we're glad to do it. But the narrative was already in, and when the narrative is in, it's very difficult, very, very difficult. So what has to happen is you almost have to spend a tremendous amount of energy and money to get the narrative as the standard.
Absolutely, and
It's
get it
crazy.
corrected.
I mean, it's not the way it should be. It absolutely is not the way it should be. How do you overcome that? It's very difficult if your message is not allowed to see the light of day. So it's a difficult position, but it's not, like you say, I mean, maybe it's too late, maybe not. I mean, we didn't understand those things. I used to yell a lot about the Serbs don't understand PR.
Yes.
I don't know how much difference it would have made, because the narrative had already been crafted, because PR is more important than bullets these days. So, it's a difficult situation, and that's very un-Serbian. Serbs stand by their principles, and, they don't like we are who we are. You should understand that, and nobody does, of course.
Something you said, and it triggered what was going on last year, and especially through the election, and it always rings true in my mind. Somebody who was a very close advisor to President Trump, as soon as the election happened and then the aftermath in January, he put out a tweet and said, the Americans, 70 million plus Americans are now literally the Serbs of the 1990s.
Yeah.
And that continues to haunt me because 70 plus million or 80 million or whatever the number is today, we don't know.
Yeah.
A
lot more than there were last week.
Potentially, yes. They have been effectively completely gaslighted. And the Serbian Americans understand this so deeply.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, gaslighting is the way. On the left, that's their lead. I mean, I've had liberal Serbs do that to me and tell me that they can't have any discourse with me because I haven't read enough books. And, you know, you might be able to argue that, but I don't have time to read every philosophical book there is on any subject. And I would say that they haven't either, but
yes,
whoever gets to the gaslight first wins, I guess.
Apparently, and there is a little bit of that elitist element happening, and not just within our community. It's permeating everywhere, and that comes from the side of the political spectrum. Anything else you would like us to address that maybe I didn't ask you, and what do you see as a path forward? Because we seem to be in a very, very particular and peculiar stage in our nation, and we don't remember it as such.
Well, the Serbian position, they basically have gone back to their roots, if you will, in the old country.
Mm-hmm.
I can't help but think that will ultimately win, because they, you know, I mean, basically, I can tell you that it is very much more difficult to keep a family together here than it is in the old country. That's the strongest. That's the strongest financial and social unit that has ever been devised by man, and everything that the history of the people shows is that is what
strong family unit.
Strong family is what they believe in, and so they ultimately they probably will win. On the other side, and especially in this country, I don't know if you've seen it in a general sense. There's a real effort to softly brand Christians as radical, supremacists of some kind or other, which is absurd. But that is going on, and that narrative is being worked out even as we are sit here talking.
Sure.
And that needs to be fought, and the only way you fight it is just say this is absurd, period.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we ran a bill on critical race theory not being taught in schools in America, and I'll tell you, I was the chairman of that committee, the Workforce Development Committee, and I got more phone calls from people who thought I was some kind of a fascist for even running the bill. It wasn't, I wasn't the sponsor. After I had about 5 minutes of talking with them and explained my history, all the people ended up laughing and saying, boy, I sure would like to talk to you about this some more.
Interesting.
And I would say, absolutely, I can do that. And we need to have the conversation. I don't have any problem understanding what went on in this country in the last 200 years. There's no doubt about it. However, we've come an awful long way.
Yes.
And there are things that in the narrative that is being told to us that are just false.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we have a long way to go. I think what's going on in Serbia right now is probably the best way forward. And in some ways, Eastern Europe is showing us the way.
Yes.
You know, and within Hungary and Poland
and you're Serbia. Right.
Mm-hmm. And to a degree, Romania. They're showing us the way to be your own country and be, you know, true to yourself. And I think that needs to continue. Myself, I mean, I wish the United States had that kind of courage right now.
How are we going to find our way here?
Exactly. And, you know, Trump had it going. He had the whole thing working.
Mhm.
And I would go to conservative areas of my district, and I would ask them one question. I said, I'm conducting a one-question survey, and that is, does it bother you that the Black unemployment rate is at its lowest level ever? And they would all give me this funny look, and they would say, why would that bother me? Why would that bother me? That doesn't bother me. We're happy that, you know,
Quite the contrary.
nobody
Sure.
cares. Nobody cares that I talk to.
Mhm.
I mean, it's not a big deal. Make money. You're working and you're making money. God bless you, and keep at it.
Absolutely.
And I don't know where this all this white supremacy stuff and that kind of thing, I don't even know where it comes from, to tell you the truth.
But those are the narratives that are being imposed, even as you said, on our children, and it's fundamentally changing the structure of what this nation is.
And from my perspective, until the 1940s, when my father entered the Navy and fought, you know, was a veteran of World War II, he did not have to go overseas because he was a college graduate at the time. But my uncles did, and other people. Up until that time, the Serbs had no say in what went on in this country. Pure and simple. I mean,
interesting.
There are pockets where they had some influence in Nevada or out west, largely, in Arizona and places like that. There were some pretty forward-thinking Serbians, even in Tombstone and Bisbee, Arizona.
Sure.
In the 1890s, if you can believe that. But who were businessmen. But by and large, the people that came here in the late 1800s were still learning English and their children were able to start to climb. And so what happens, you know, my great grandfather was a blast furnace worker until he was 80, until he wouldn't talk to his boys because he swore they put the company up to making him retire at age 80. And
but that is that Serbian spirit. We're productive.
He was quite a character. He was a very powerful fellow physically, and his name was Miric, his last name. It was my brother's father. So he, you know, he worked in the blast furnace. My grandfather, my Zatezalo, poured steel on the open hearth floor with 4 other Serbs. One, let me see, Ilija Kosanovic, Mila Samarđija, and Sava Krtolica.
Okay.
And they were the crew. And if you didn't speak Serbian, you know, they didn't pour much steel. But and my father was the manager of the steelworks, and that's the way it goes.
Sure.
You know? And so you know, and I consider that a quintessential American story.
American dream. Yes.
Oh, well, and in my family, it's pretty rampant too, you know, because there are other people in my family who've done some very good things, you know. I have an uncle.
But something that I just want to go back to something that you said, and it struck me that we have had so many World War II veterans who come from the Serbian American community. And up until that point, as you said, we haven't had that much influence. But it's now, today, an interesting fact that out of the immigrant communities, and I think you mentioned this to me as well, that Serbian Americans in the United States military are the most awarded veterans and most awarded officials that any community has.
It's probably pretty. I'm not as up on all the veterans. I don't think I said that, but I certainly don't disagree with it.
Sure.
I mean, you know, I can cite you examples from around here. Well, my uncle was shot down over the Adriatic. And saved the crew, and so he got a medal for that. You know, they were bombing the oil fields in Romania. And so they came back, and he couldn't. It was an interesting story because he was told, you know, if you get shot down and you find yourself in In the hands of the Chetniks, you'll be fine. If you find yourself in the hands of the partisans, you'll be fine. If you find yourself in the hands of the Croatian Ustashi, pull out your gun and fight to the end. It was
There you go.
I mean, that was what he was told.
Isn't that the truth? And as you said, if you fall into the hands of especially the Chetniks, we have the Halyard mission,
Absolutely,
where we rescued the Serbs. It was the grandest military rescue mission in history, rescuing 500 US Navy airmen over Serbia. So those are the things that we share between the Serbian and the American people. So much history.
absolutely.
And then for all of us to watch what unraveled in the 1990s. And
We
as
thought
you said,
everybody knew that.
is it partially even our fault that we didn't maybe promote this enough?
Without
Do
question,
Americans really know about
without question,
our contributions?
without a doubt, it was. But that's because PR. Who the hell cares about PR?
Yes,
I mean,
that's
the
true.
Serbians just say, "Hey, here it is. Look at the history," and that's not the way the game is played now.
Yes.
You dictate the history in your narrative, and then anything that falls out of that narrative is wrong, which is insane.
And I think we made too many assumptions
Exactly.
on common sense, but apparently common sense is not a part of the game.
And I would explain things to people. I explained things to people down in Argentina. I was down there to look at landfills in the state of Cordoba.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to explain all this to these people because they were convinced the Serbians were about the most evil people. And I explained what happened during World War II. And I of course, told them that, of course, Ante Pavlic ended up in Argentina.
Exactly.
Ended up in Argentina, and they would look at each other. And some of these guys were colonels in the army who had actually stopped a couple coups and saw to it that they stopped fighting each other, you know. And they would just look at me and think about it. They were glad to see me in they would always, when some of my compatriots in the company would go down there, they would ask, "When's he coming back?" So it's kind of funny.
Well, I guess we did make some mistakes. We did not inform the world and people around us, but it's a lesson learned.
It was an assumption on on the Serbians' part, and I would include American Serbs as well.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, so, and fortunately for us, we were well known in this area and, you know, across the country, and people didn't react terribly negatively to us at all.
Right.
And then you get the other side of the story, and that is, to me, that's why I love this country, and I hate to see the things that are going on right now, because there are 3 people that come to work every day in Pittsburgh in the same car. One is a Bosnian Muslim, one is a Serb, and one is a Croatian.
Wow.
All of them are refugees from Bosnia.
Wow.
And they go to work in the same car without any problem. And the reason, I think, and maybe it's just faulty, naive logic, but if the Constitution works, there's no fear. And when there's no fear, you know, you don't have to worry about such things. And that is the biggest message I could say for, you know, you have to try to eliminate the fear.
Yes.
And
fear of the other.
Here, the Constitution does that. It's set up to do that.
Absolutely.
But the way things are going, if they're going to make, you know, races either evil or good, depending on what race you are, it's a blueprint for disaster, because once again, the fear starts to seep in.
Absolutely. What a great story to close this, of the 3 refugees going in the car together, and all our best to them.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
that is the beauty of this nation, and that is why this nation is so worth fighting for.
I agree. It's the principles are sound. They've been proven time and again. There's a reason why 90% of the people in this country make at or above the average wage of the world.
Yes.
90% at or above, not even with. I mean, that happens because of freedom. you know, and the ability to innovate and the ability to think and act and speak your mind.
Sure. And
With
if those freedoms erode, we will not have a nation anymore.
Amen. Can't say it any better.
Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure having you on today.
You're most welcome, and Paula.
Hvala.
Okay.